Well guys, it finally happened. Dungeon Quest has now been discontinued. If you haven't kept up to date with Dungeon Quest news, one of the developers has stated that the team working on Dungeon Quest is now going to focus on one of Voldex's other games. Now this was saddening news, especially for me since I'm primarily a Dungeon Quest content creator, but seeing the rough Christmas 2024 event, it would be kind of understandable that Voldex would seem to abandon the game. Now this video will just be me covering what could have caused Voldex to stop working on Dungeon Quest, their history working on Dungeon Quest, and whether it was for the better or for the worst after VCAFE's era. Now let's get into the video. Now I just want to remind that this is just my opinion, so your views and thoughts of Dungeon Quest might be different from mine. However, I would like to hear your guys' opinions in the comments below, and I may read some of them. Now, the original creator of Dungeon Quest, Vinny, also known as VCAFE, had sold the game to Voldex in summer 2023. Voldex has publicly announced it, and their first major update was the release of Yokai Peak. Believe it or not, Voldex's first dungeon actually raised the player base by quite a lot, boxing out the Northern Lands and the Gilded Skies player counts. However, this dungeon wasn't without its major drawbacks. See, before Voldex's first dungeon, they already received quite a bit of backlash for their other games, specifically with Encounters and Zozo. Now, Yokai Peak is exactly what my friends warned me what Voldex would try to do. This dungeon is way too easy even after all of the buffs that Voldex has given it. And the core reason for that is the attacks are mostly boring and they're way too easy to dodge, except for maybe a few attacks on the second boss and the third boss. The worst part about Yokai Peak, however, were the new spells. You guys know this already, but the spells from Yokai Peak absolutely sucked. They are actually the first set of spells that actually got legitimate balance changes after release. I believe the last spell to get balance changes was either Rending Slice or Electric Boom from King's Castle, and those were released somewhere around 2019 or 2018, I don't remember. But that goes to show how balanced VCAFE was in releasing his dungeons. He never really made any balance changes to these spells. Now, Yokai Peak itself wasn't really a badly designed dungeon. Like, there was obviously flaws, but there was a few positives. Like, the music, it wasn't that bad, even though I personally didn't enjoy it that much. The bosses had interesting concepts, even if they were easy to dodge. And just the general details in all the items and the map itself were pretty nice, even if I didn't like the theming of all of them. Now the next few updates after the Yokai Peak update would clearly define Voldex's era on Dungeon Quest events. And I'm just gonna get this out of the way, these events were mediocre at best. Now the three events Voldex did after the Yokai Peak update were Halloween 2023, Christmas 2023, and Easter 2024. I'm going to be covering these events in the order that they have first appear, so let's go into Halloween 2023 first. Now the long and short of it, this event kinda sucks. It was way too grindy and the rewards weren't even that rewarding, it only gave you cosmetics and some boosts. The only thing that was quite cool was the entirely new dungeon, even if it was kinda boring, honestly. Like, it was designed to be played by anybody at any level. However, the big problem with this is it's a 15-minute dungeon and it just carries on for way too long. Especially in the maze section. Like, there are some enemies in the maze, but you can't kill them because they have too much HP and they don't even chase you around or anything. So pretty much this event sucked. The crafting materials, it was a cool concept, but it was way too grindy and pretty much pay to win because you were able to pay Robux to get some materials, and if you were grinding the event, you would only get around 3 to 5 materials, I don't remember how much, if you completed the dungeon, which is not a lot at all when you needed like 50 or 100 materials to get something. It was just overall not a good design event. Now the next event, Christmas 2023, was better than Halloween 2023 in my opinion. However, it still has its flaws, and in my opinion, it's still not that great of an event. First of all, it was a return to form of the original grind dungeons to get snowflakes, to get cosmetics and stuff. But the thing that really killed me for this event were the cosmetics were not really that appealing to me, and the gifting system. Now, it's not a bad thing that you can gift to players, but the bad thing about it is you needed to gift stuff to players in order to get rewards for them, and those were limited time rewards that you couldn't get anywhere else. So that just adds an unnecessarily paywall to a new feature. Now, of course, it had no impact on gameplay, and honestly, the cosmetic didn't look that good either, but why not just put a direct purchase on it? Now, at this point in the video, I actually forgot that Voldex released a remaster for Desert Temple at this time, so let me cover that now. This is actually one of the better updates in Voldex's era, and I actually have very little to no complaints about this update. It was a really nice remaster for Desert Temple, and it was good to remaster the dungeon because the original Desert Temple was really boring, and honestly, it changed my outlook on Desert Temple from like an F tier all the way up to like an A to B tier dungeon. Really nice. However, my problem with this dungeon is you're given 15 minutes to beat the dungeon when you can only beat it in like a minute with speed spells. And also, the minions deal so little damage that even on hard, you can survive a lot of minion damage with no armor. Like, that is how little damage they deal. Like, sure, the bosses deal like 20 to 30 damage, but all the minions deal 6 damage, so you can tank a lot of damage on that difficulty. Now, I understand it's the first dungeon in the game, and of course, anyone who's new to Dungeon Quest would know that, but I think maybe at least reduce the time for this dungeon. Okay, the next event after Christmas 2023 was Easter 2024, and you guys know I have a bit of history with this event. Now, this event is miles better than Christmas 2023 and Halloween 2023. However, it still has its flaws. And that flaws is with the boss they added. Now, the boss has a very good base, I would say. The attacks are very interesting, and I like the 3-phase system. And I like the extra timing stuff they did with the bosses on higher tiers. However, the problem is with the balancing of those tiers, because on later tiers, you start losing how many lives you have. Like on tier 1 all the way up to tier 5 or tier 6, I don't remember, you have 3 lives. But from tier 6 on to tier 9, you have 2 lives. And on tier 10 and higher, you only have 1 life. So you were basically playing on hardcore mode at the final tier. And it didn't help that all the damage was percentage based. I don't know if you guys ever caught that, and I'm pretty sure I explained it in my Easter 2024 video, but all the damage is percentage based, so your stamina does not matter at all. So what I mean is, say you have a Guardian with 50 billion HP and you have a DPS with like 2 billion HP. And when he does that cone attack, it deals about 70% of your HP. So it will always 2-shot a Guardian and it will always 2-shot a DPS. This is not how you balance stuff in Dungeon Quest, even for events. What's worse is the damage you deal to the boss is actually capped and not scaled. So if you were using King's Castle items against a tier 30 Bunny King, then you would deal like a couple million to it. And if you were a Yokai Peak player dealing like 50Q with Void Dragon, you would only deal 11Q, which is a GS level. So the scaling was very all over the place. In fact, if you were a GS player playing tier 10 Bunny King, you would actually deal less than standard GS damage, which is not right at all. So those were my base problems with the Bunny King. Its overall attacks weren't that bad. It's just that you had only 1 life to beat it on tier 10. And also, 15 minutes was very unnecessarily long because you cannot dodge within 15 minutes before you get bad RNG or you just screw up somehow. So that side I really hated it. It really could have been a decent event at best. Like the Krampus fight from VCafe was a really good boss, even if the reward really sucked. And same with the Pumpkin King, it was a really good boss. It just dealt a lot of damage, sure, and the attacks were somewhat difficult to dodge. And it had a decent reward, like the Pumpkin King cosmetic. I regretted not grinding for it. But this event, I really wouldn't care if I miss it, because the Bunny King was just too hard for me. Now, I'm not going to cover any of the other events because, honestly, they're all kind of similar. Even the Halloween 2024 and Christmas 2024 event, they are all very similar in that you grind dungeons to get exclusive currency that you can use to buy exclusive cosmetics. Now, as for Voldex's content updates, it is very hit or miss with me, and a lot of the older players don't like any of the content updates that Voldex has pushed out. Excluding the Desert Temple and Winter Outpost remakes, the first major content update was the Gregg's update. I'm going to keep these brief because I made an entire video about these content updates, but the long and short of it, Gregg is interesting. I do like the craftable weapons since they brought something new to the table for dungeon quests, but I really didn't like how the power of the weapons were like 2 dungeons ahead of when you can actually start getting them. Now, of course, it was really hard to get them, but the fact you can still get a weapon that is like 2 dungeons higher than your current dungeon just didn't really sit well with me. Now, Gregg being easy and RNG dependent didn't really sit well with me, but to be fair, it was a global boss that you could encounter in any dungeon, so of course, Voldex would have balanced it for newer players. But for us endgame players starting at Orbital Outpost, it gets really easy, especially since you have the speed spells from starting at the canals. I think that's where it starts getting really easy. The only hard bit about Gregg is his shield and how much health he has. So overall, the Gregg update, I think it was an okay update. It wasn't really the best update available because us endgame players were really craving a new dungeon after February or something. But we really starved for content, honestly. The next major update is the boss raids overhaul update, and again, just like the Gregg's update, I'm gonna keep this brief because I made a whole video about it. But the boss was really good, even though a lot of people expressed that tier 5 was too hard. I think it's actually really easy once you get it down. However, the one thing that kills me about this update that stops it from being the best update that Voldex has pushed out was the limited challenges. I really hated the fact that you could only play this for like 3 times a day and you could purchase 3 extra tries with Robux. I really didn't like that. Now, Voldex's statement to this is they were going to make rings rarer and not overpower the economy. But in my opinion, they should have just made the rings rarer and also make the gear you get based on a tier you can play the boss. Like, why do you need to cap the amount of times you can play the boss and make the loot give whatever your dungeon loot is? Like, in all honesty, what they should have done is make rings a lot rarer, remove the cap for playing bosses, and make the loot cap to whatever level that you can play the boss raid at. Like, for the tier 5 boss raid, there is no reason you should be able to get Abyssal Void items from it. Like, sure, you could get Yokai Peak Insane and possibly Yokai Peak Nightmare items from tier 5, but you should not be able to get Abyssal Void or even a 220 dungeon item from it. That should not be possible in this, and the reason for this is it prevents people from grinding their latest dungeon to get items. Like, with Abyssal Void, I still grinded boss raids just to get purple armors. I didn't really care that I didn't have ultimates and stuff. So yeah, basically boss raids overhaul, loved the boss and the general concept, but really disliked the challenges and stuff. The event wasn't even that bad, like it was probably the best event Voldex has released up until that point. But because of the limited challenges, I really didn't like this update. which is really disappointing because everything else they did in the update was really good, but the limited tries just kills it for me. Now, up until Abyssal Void, we didn't really get any major content update for Dungeon Quest, but we did, however, get the Hela boss raid. Hela was okay. I do think it is weaker than Goliath, however, because the attacks in general were a lot harder than Goliath in my opinion. Like, even though I'm like a good player and can beat Hela consistently without losing all of my lives, I still have not been able to consistently beat it without dying at all. And I always run the recommended amount of HP for Hela, which is something I never done for Goliath actually. I did run the recommended HP at the beginning, but once I started getting better, I was able to lower my HP a little bit, but that cannot be said for Hela. I always kept the recommended HP for it. So Hela overall, pretty decent boss. I do like the new rings, and even though they were a little bit weak, I guess. But the Draugr mages and the crystals being able to stun you were what really made it difficult for me, because as soon as you get stunned, you just die. Now I know Dungeon Quest has been like that traditionally, but when so many enemies are able to stun you, that's kind of a problem. Now just an edit over here, I forgot that Voldex released the quest update sometime in between this period, but it didn't really add anything major, so I'm just gonna skim over it. The quests overall were okay. I didn't like that some of the quests had you to play with friends or with other people, as it just gatekept you at some moments, because it's really hard to get into dungeons in players with around the level you are supposed to be. And even in boss raids where you're supposed to play with a lot of people don't really run boss raids that much because, again, the limited amount of plays restrict that. So overall, it was okay. I really didn't like the XP nerf below Volcanic Chambers. And honestly, I think the XP for the Nightmare difficulty after Volcanic Chambers should have been increased further, especially for Aquatic Temple. But pretty much, it was okay. I didn't really mind or didn't really care about it. So that's all I have to say for quests. Now, the last major content update that I know of is the Abyssal Void update, and you guys already know how I feel about this update. It's really good, but some of the items I didn't really like their designs, and I didn't really like the size of the insane weapons, and Nightmare is way too difficult. But to be honest, Abyssal Void's overall player count and retention never reached past Gilded Skies or Northern Lands player counts at all. In fact, it is probably Voldex's weakest content update in a community standpoint. Now, Abyssal Void is the last major content update we actually got for Dungeon Quest, and no, I'm not counting DQ+, because that is extremely pay to win, and I really don't like that. Now I'm going to answer the long-standing question: did Voldex ruin Dungeon Quest, or did they make it better as a whole? And well, it's kinda complicated. Now, in my general friend group, it's no secret they all have a deep hatred for Voldex after the Encounters game has been discontinued. But in their eyes, Dungeon Quest was ruined for them, and I can definitely see why, but for me personally, I'm kind of conflicted on whether Voldex did good or bad. So covering the good stuff first, Voldex had some really interesting ideas and updates for Dungeon Quest. Like Boss Raid's Overhaul, I think that was really well done, along with the remasters Desert Temple and Winter Outpost. Like even the Yokai Peak and the Abyssal Void update were decent. I do think Yokai Peak is the weakest content updates, except for quests. But overall, I think they did pretty good with adding new content. Now, the major downside, which kills Dungeon Quest for everybody, is they added so many pay-to-win elements to the game, especially for events. Now, every single event that Voldex has released other than the boss raids events have basically been pay-to-win, especially the Abyssal Void events, surprisingly, because in Yokai Peak, the event wasn't really pay-to-win since it was really easy to get all the stuff. But after that, all the events were pay to win, especially Halloween 2023, Christmas 2023, a little bit of Easter 2024. Halloween 2024, and even Christmas 2024 all were pay to win. And even the boss rates overhaul update had pay to win in it with the limited challenges. You basically had twice as much luck to get ranks if you spent Robux, which is really bad for the game. Now I do understand why Voldex is trying to do some type of monetization for this game, but honestly for VCafe's era, this game was never really pay to win. Other than the extra item game pass and maybe some XP boost, the game was never really pay to win. So if you introduce some type of monetization in a game that was never pay to win to begin with, you're going to get a lot of backlash, and Voldex has definitely taken the blunt of it from both encounters and maybe a few other past games that they did. Now the answer to the long-standing question of whether Voldex ruined Dungeon Quest or not, I would say sort of. A lot of the content updates were really good, like the boss rates overhaul, of course Abyssal Void, the remasters of dungeons, quests, Yokai Peak even, but so much of the pay-to-win elements were what bring the game down, and for everyone who dislikes Voldex and Dungeon Quest nowadays, the pay-to-win is the pure reason why they don't like new Dungeon Quest. So the overall state of the game, I guess, is okay. It's not really the best ending it should have gotten. Like, honestly, the current end for Dungeon Quest is exactly the same as VCafe's end of Dungeon Quest. Not in a good shape, but not bad either. It's just kind of mediocre. Now I do hope sometime that Voldex decides to continue the game and maybe add some legacy elements, like a legacy difficulty for all dungeons, for an example. But it's just my ideas. Maybe I'm just missing those dungeons difficulties too much. Now, I will still be finishing my Noob to Godly series, but after that, I will move on from Dungeon Quest. I could try Arcane Conquest, maybe make a live stream about it in a few days, because a lot of old players have asked me to try out the game, so I will try it out sometime. So that's really the end of this video. If you guys like this video and want to see more content from me, please drop a like and subscribe to the channel for more content. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Peace.